Hello and welcome to this panel about the Cymera Prize for Speculative Short Fiction. Lovely to virtually see you all. We are here with our judges for the 2021 prize. We are going to talk about our shortlist. We're going to reveal our winner, and you'll also be able to pick up some tips and tricks about how to write the perfect short story. No pressure. So with us, we have our three judges, Oliver Langmead, Cat Hellisen, and Noel Chidwick. Say hello.
Hello.
Oh.
Well, I'll just give you a brief introduction to let you know why they're qualified to judge one of Scotland's finest short fiction prizes. And then we're going to jump right in. So, Cat Hellisen is a fantasy writer originally from South Africa who has wisely made her home in Scotland, where she spends her non-writing time running around with a ridiculous dog. Do follow her on Instagram and Twitter. The dog is adorable. And figure skating without the dog. Cat's novels include When the Sea is Rising Red, Beastkeeper, House of Sand and Secrets, Empty Monsters, Bones Like Bridges, and King of the Hollow Dark. Her short stories have appeared in Tor.com, the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Apex magazine, and Something Wicked, and in several anthologies ranging from Lovecraftian to steampunk to African fiction. She won the Short Story Day Africa Award in 2015 for The Wormbridge. So she is perfectly placed to be one of our judges, as you can see. Joining her on the judging panel was Oliver K Langmate, who lives and writes in Glasgow. His long-form poem, Dark Star, featured in Guardian's Best Book of 2015, and his new book, Birds of Paradise, is just out with Titan, and I can highly recommend it. Oliver is currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Glasgow, where he's researching terraforming and ecological philosophy. And in late 2018, he was the writer-in-residence at the European Space Agency Astronaut Centre in Cologne. Yes, he did go near space. And rounding up our judging panel is Noel Chidwick, head judge, in actual fact. Noel is the founder and editor-in-chief of Shoreline of Infinity, Scotland's award-winning science fiction magazine. And they are also the magazine that publishes our winning story. So many thanks to Noel for supporting the prize like that. So thank you again for giving up your time and your expertise, reading all those stories. It must have been a terrible, terrible task we set you.
That's all right.
Just all right. I've read them. There were some fantastic stories in there.
Oh, they were great.
They were. Let's start with the basics. What makes a good story? Oliver, do you want to start? Putting you on the spot.
Makes a good story.
A good short story.
A good short story. Starting with the impossible question. It's a difficult one to answer because it depends. You have all different kinds of short stories coming from all different types of writers, and each of them doing different unusual things and taking you to new places. I think for me, it comes down to I like being taken to a new place every time I read something. And there's no better way to do that quickly. It's like going away for a little holiday with a short story. You're taken away for a few moments to somewhere new, taken into a new idea.
Lovely. Cat, do you agree?
Yeah, I think a short story can take you places. I think it can also take you home. And that's a good place to go. I think what makes a good short story for me is that it feels relevant to me in some way, to the human condition. And that can be in a science fiction story, but it can also be in a literary short story. There's something in that story that feels immediate. And whether it's whatever format it's written in and whatever sort of narrative style the writer's gone for, if there's that, it's almost an intangible thing that you sort of hook on, you go, oh, yes, I want to carry on reading this. I think it's partly a sense of place where the setting is as much a character to the story as an actual character. It's tangible, and those sort of details hook me, grab me. Maybe like Oliver says, taking you to a different place. And the use of language. I think short stories have in a way, more room than a novel to play with language. So short stories that do interesting things with language, that do interesting things with settings, but still have a specificity that makes it human in some way. Those are the things that work for me as a short story.
So the theme we set this year was after the plague, because we optimistically thought that by the time our submissions will come in, we'd be over this. Obviously, that wasn't quite the case. Do you think all our submissions had a good stab at capturing an after the plague idea?
Yeah, I think so. But what I loved about the fact that, as you say, we're actually still in the plague, if you like. And it's not just writing about after the plague, it's actually writing about after the plague while we're in the plague. And that's something that's really, it's quite weird, really. Often science fiction, you're talking about an event that could happen, or often it's been set after the apocalypse or some disaster. We're actually still in the middle of this slow motion disaster, and we're asking people to write about afterwards. So it's quite a novel situation we've put ourselves into. And all the stories tried in their different ways to try and imagine beyond that. I think, like you, Anne, we all thought we'd all be over by now. We'd all be sort of out in the garden celebrating and getting drunk every night again, like we used to in the old days with our friends, but still not to be. So it's an interesting challenge for our writers, yeah.
The interesting thing about pandemic fiction, as it's sort of being called, is there isn't much of it out there yet. For a good reason, because publishing tends to be quite glacial, especially when it comes to books. So we're not going to see much in the way of books written during the pandemic for at least another year yet. Whereas the short story, and this is one of the reasons the short story is great, is it's a lot quicker to write, which is why it was really interesting seeing pandemic fiction so immediate to it. Reading stories written while we're still in the middle of it. It's like peeping into the future a little bit, which was great.
I'm also wondering if we're not going to see that many novels about it for a long time, because publishers are literally going to just go, no, we can't face it. Whereas short stories can kind of hit you quickly and then run away. I don't know if I could sit through a whole plague novel right now, just in terms of the immediacy, but the short stories I could do. So maybe because they're shorter, they just also give us that smaller window that we can just look in and go, okay, yeah, all right, now I'm backing out again.
Yeah, well, certainly with this subject, what we're looking at as well as the writers themselves, I expect, probably found it quite cathartic to write about it. And for the readers as well, and for us reading all, however many it was, we all got our own little bits of therapy as well. Someone else thinks like we are thinking at the moment in this pandemic, and that's quite fascinating to read. As Oliver says, short story being written in the now for us to read in the present while we're still in the middle of all this. So it's quite reassuring again to realise we're not alone. We're all roughly thinking and feeling the same kind of things about all these pandemics we're suffering at the moment.
It felt a bit like reading an anthology, which I quite enjoyed, because obviously it's set to a theme, and it had the same old thing that everyone has with an anthology, right? Some of the short stories absolutely work in a brilliant view. Some of them don't quite work for you, but you still get an absolutely brilliant mixture of different voices and points of view on this one much bigger, huge topic. It was great.
Yeah, I think even though obviously the theme was after the plague, people came at it from such different angles that no one story was exactly the same as another. There was a huge variety, as you say, in the tone and in how they approached it.
Yeah. And there was a lot of optimism, wasn't there, and humor, and
thank goodness, because I actually found it kind of emotionally painful to read some of them, because I was like, oh, I'm too deep in this, I can't. So having that little bit of the little moth at the end, the little bit of hope was good. Thank goodness for that.
And what about Scottishness? Did you pick out much Scottishness in the stories? Maybe with the humour, I thought, in some of them.
Yeah, definitely. Some had a much stronger voice. Some had a much stronger voice in terms of it felt distinctly Scottish, and others were more broad strokes, appealing to a wider audience, I think, in terms of maybe they were just writing with the idea that there's an international audience out there, maybe we must sort of temper language and that sort of thing. But yeah, there was definitely a Scottishness coming through. in many of the stories.
I thought so too. Particularly the winning one, maybe? I don't know. We can
And I
discuss
think
that.
that might have been part of what gave it its quality, was the voice.
Well, we'll get to it. Don't rush in.
Sorry.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. I know you're keen to talk about it.
My bad.
Noel, when you're looking at the stories, as from an editor's point of view, what are you looking for? Is there anything in particular?
It's hard to say. I mean, the first thing I do is read it as a reader rather than an editor when I get to the stories. I settle down with a mug of coffee and sit there with a pile of stories and start just to enjoy them as a reader. But thing I think I'm always looking for is to make sure it pretty well grabs you fairly early on. And with a short story, you haven't got much space to manoeuvre, so you really kind of have to grab the audience fairly quickly in the first paragraph or two or a few of them. That's not a definite rule. There's still one of the stories we received I really enjoyed, but it's a slow burner, but I still found myself reading into it and being sucked gently into it, teased into the story, and that's quite an art as well, especially for a short story. But I think really, as Ollie said, it depends, doesn't it? Because with this theme, you really want to get into it very quickly. You haven't got time to muck about with sort of setting the scene of setting how the pandemic came about, what happened, and then eventually, there's your 2,000 words up. You haven't got there. So there's a lot of things you have to be able to pick up as you're reading a short story that gives you the background as you're going along, little hints, little touches here and there. It's more like a water painting where you get more impression of the detail, rather than a complete like a photograph where you get all the detail. So it's how you apply your gentle brushstrokes, how you apply your words to really paint that picture. That's the art of the short story, really. You're giving an impression very quickly, I suppose.
So from a writer's point of view, Oliver and Kat, what are the kind of the really nice things about writing a short story, and what are the challenges and the drawbacks if you settle on writing a short story and you give yourself that limit? Kat, do you wanna take that first?
Yeah, okay. So opportunities. I think I touched on it when I said short stories give you more space to play with voice and with how to approach a story. So if we look at things like J.G. Ballard's Answers to a Questionnaire or Keith Johnson's Nantes Wives are two short stories that could never work as novels. They are so particular in their style. And if you haven't read either of them, I recommend that you do. They play with structure and they play with voice in a way that you could never do in a novel. If you try to sustain that over a long length, you lose your reader. But they work so well in these little snippets, and they're delightful. But yeah, as Noel says, you need a strong focus. You don't have space to play around with wasting time or words on like backstory and creating a setting. That's all these very immediate brushstrokes. For me, with writing, I really like to just start with like a single line that just kind of catches people's attention. And I think if you get that, you can build from there really, really, it kind of flows in a way that a novel doesn't. But then, of course, the challenges are to keep that focus and to have an ending that doesn't have to be clever. I don't think, like, there's an idea that some people have that all short stories must have this woohoo ending. You're like, oh, snap, but I don't think they need to have snap endings. I think they just need to sing throughout the story. Yeah, so for me, that's the opportunities and the advantages of short stories. Yeah, that's how I see it. Oliver?
So, all right, as a writer, getting to grips with writing is about addressing failure. It's about giving yourself enough room to fail at trying things, at writing chapters, at writing new books, so that you can work out what works on the basis of that. Short stories give you a lot more room to fail and experiment and do wild things because they're so small and disposable. And when even a story that absolutely succeeds for someone, it doesn't have to succeed for everyone because it can be part of an anthology, and you can pass over it and it doesn't have to work for you because eventually in that anthology you'll find something that does. So it's like Kat says, there's a lot more room for experimentation there, for trying interesting things with form that your average reader won't maybe enjoy quite as much. I mean, there's certainly room for larger experiments in novels, but sustaining them is difficult. And the short story is the perfect vehicle for just trying something short and sweet. The downside is, and this is one thing that is particularly impressive about writing short stories for science fiction fantasy, is science fiction fantasy comes from a tradition of writing very overlong things. It's about meandering. It's about developing these huge epic things, forms, universes, worlds. So to be able to condense that down to just one quick short story is such a skill. Brevity. I'm a great admirer of brevity, and being able to do that for a short story is quite extraordinary. It's something I find very difficult. I find it easier to write novels than I do short stories. So this is me coming to this competition from a place of awe for what a successful short story looks like.
Actually related to that, when you were talking about trying to get that information, that huge amount of information that novels like to have, especially in science fiction fantasy, into a short story. I think that's where stories that do well have a precision of language that fills in all those long spaces. There's a poetry to the language, and I don't mean a purpleness to the prose, although it can. It's just that they know the exact right word to use instead of the 300 words that would describe a spaceship. They will use that one word. If the classic Iris saying door, you just have to have that perfect specific word, and you have, with one line, created so much backstory and so much detail. And I think that's where short stories have an edge. They have like a poetic choice of language. They can take language and use it in a way that is very precise, but also very flowery, to create a scene, to use their setting. And I think that's a beautiful thing with short stories.
It does make you wonder why short story collections sell so badly, doesn't it? Because they are such works of art and such anthologies as well.
Yeah, well, they do take a lot of work. I mean, Mark Twain said, was it... They wrote a letter to a friend and said at the very bottom, "Sorry, this letter's so long. I didn't have time to make it shorter." And that's true about a short story, right? You have to really craft away at it, chip away at the excess to get to the precision that Cat's looking for, to make that simple explanation in one sentence. Because you haven't got a paragraph or a page to make it in a short story, you've got one sentence. So yeah, it is a craft, and maybe people don't. I think people appreciate it when they read them, because they do love short stories. But yeah, it's funny how they don't quite so go down so well as a full fat novella. I don't know, or a full fat novel. But
I wonder if we'll come round.
We're doing our best at Shoreline, I can tell you.
Keep them into submission.
Yes, submission is a nice keyword.
Yeah.
Right, shall we talk about our 3 shortlists? Noel, do you want to do the honor of announcing our 3 shortlisted stories?
The shortlisted stories, yes.
Yes, not the winner yet. We're just going to talk about the shortlist.
So I will give you the 3 shortlisted stories. I will randomly in my head announce them like this. There was, I love this title, The Odd Bods and Death Husk by Moti Black. We also have The Microwave Library. I'll say that again. The Microwave Library by David Tam Mcdonald. And we have Screened by I.R. Boyd. Those are our 3 stories.
Congratulations to everyone on the shortlist. Well done.
Well done, yeah.
So let's have a look at a quick one at the 3 shortlisted stories, just to maybe see what made them stand out from all the submissions. Noel, do you want to pick which one we start with?
Good one. Tell you what, let's pick the one with the weirdest title, The Odd Bods and Death Husk by Moti Black. And if you, the first thing about that one is one of the few stories that was actually set with aliens as the lead characters. Everyone else and every other writer seemed to assume we were talking about human plague since we're in the middle of one. But the weird thing about this one is it took a bit of time to actually realise that it was about aliens suffering quarantine, being kept at home when things were going bad to worse, deaths appearing. And I don't want to give too much away by describing the kind of aliens, but by using aliens as your lead characters, especially at the moment, in the middle of our own current plague, it did quite give a different perspective on things. So that was quite an adventurous approach, I thought, by Moti Black to pick aliens as the main characters.
Oliver, was that one of the things that drew you to that story?
Yeah. So writing effective allegory is very difficult. It's one of the most extraordinary balancing acts I think you can do with fiction, is to write effective allegory. Because especially if you're going into the intentionality of it, this is going to be an allegory for something quite explicit. And I'm very wary of it when I read it, because you often allegory just sort of punches you on the nose, or it's so buried deep in there that it's difficult to unpack. But this story walks that tightrope. I found it affecting, which was really lovely, affecting, and its moments of allegory compelling, and the inventiveness of what it did with it. Yeah, it was involving in a way that I don't often find allegory is. So I was super impressed with that one.
Kat, were you?
Well, I was drawn immediately to the title, as I think Noel also pointed out. Such a lovely title. And for me, it was also, and Oliver and I discussed this, it was because it was one of the stories that didn't have a human perspective that made it particularly lovely. Like Oliver, I'm not a huge fan of allegory, but this one did work, and it wasn't subtle, but it was subtle enough. And the deaths and the way they were treated were very human and very affecting, although you're dealing with aliens, and also I don't want to say what kind of aliens, and they're not human aliens, and they're not like Star Trek human-esque aliens. They were still touching, and the story was very human at its heart, and I think that's what made it work as a story as well. That you could feel the grief, and you could feel all these things that we're feeling now, but now through a completely different lens, which I think was part of its appeal, definitely.
Excellent. Anything to add? Shall we move on to the next one? Noel?
Okay.
A judge's choice?
Well, let one of the judges choose. Which story should we talk about?
Oh,
Kat, do you want to pick one? I know. Hard.
Make it hard for us.
I had a coin somewhere I could flip, but I've lost it.
I haven't used a coin for months.
Well, we can do them in order. So the next one is on my list is the Microwave Library.
Okay.
Excellent plan. Let's do that one. Kat, you want to start?
Yeah, okay. For me, obviously, I think it might be fairly clear that I like stories to have a human heart, and this one very much did. And it had a very domestic human heart, which is good to me. It also had a beautiful way of just, zoning in on the little details that surround us and are so everyday and so normal, like the description of the neighbor's beard, and talking about how we don't kiss people with beards because beards are so disgusting now, and because they are now, you're just like, everything's disgusting now. And it was those little details that I think everyone is disgusting. It caught you, it hooked you, because you're like, yes, it's those observations of humanity that to me really make a story work. If I can see that you are an observer of humanity and you know how to share that with readers, I think that's a unique skill, and this writer very much had it. For me, that was very enjoyable.
Yeah, I think it really brought out during the pandemic, how people actually help each other in little ways, and that's amplified in the current circumstances. One little thing making popping around the neighbour to give them a sandwich. Just that little thing. You wouldn't think about that normally, but in current circumstances, that becomes a profound happening. And in this story, I think that's really what I took from it. Really took this little benefit that was created in this story and amplifying it thousandfold to make it so much more powerful.
Oliver?
Yeah, it is a richly vivid story that's full of warmth and these instantly recognizable characters. It's so it feels so close, warm. It's a cozy story that'll draw you into it. It just jumped out at me from the very first paragraph. It's fantastic.
Very good. And the last of our shortlisted one is Screened. Who wants to? Oliver, do you want to start on that one?
Sure thing. So I think I wrote this down, and I think this is something that me and Kat discussed. These days, a touchstone for dystopia has become Black Mirror. It's become so ubiquitous that people say, "Oh, that would make a good Black Mirror episode." When we're talking about dystopia, this story would really make a good Black Mirror episode. That was my immediate thought reading through it. It was from the. I'm trying not to spoil it. It has a bleak outlook shot through with moments of hope, and there's such a style to it that just felt so appropriate for the kind of message it was trying to put out. Bleak shot through with moments of hope.
Like life.
Yay!
Yay!
Yeah, I thought it was a very a visual, punchy kind of story, so I could see it in my head. I felt it again. We did discuss this, and Black Mirror definitely came up. It's one of those stories that you can kind of see being on Netflix. You know, you can picture the color tones they're going to use and everything, and it very much ties into our modern fear, with good reason, of being run by these big corporations like Amazon and Google, who know every move we make and control everything we do, and our social lives are basically governed by the machines that these corporations happily provide for us. So yeah, I think in that it was very relevant to today. I don't want to give anything away. So yeah.
Yeah, this is very hard not giving away the plot. It probably sounds a bit weird talking about a story you haven't read. Well, I think that also is, like this one also talked about pandemics in the plural, which I thought was quite interesting. A few stories did that. It's almost like they're expecting a sort of cycle of pandemics from this point onwards. Maybe that's quite the road to the story, but certainly that's something I just realised when I was reading it through earlier, that's again, and it's starting to worry just now, is we possibly getting another wave of lockdown coming along, if you're going to be really pessimistic. Are we ever going to get out of it? That's the other feeling I was getting from this story as well. There wasn't anything that said, "Hey, we're going to we're breaking the machine." It's well, not just yet. We're still part of it. Oh yeah.
So much for that hopeful thing we were going for there. There was hope in the story.
There was.
It's just not quite the hope you're hoping for.
We want more hope than that. Give us more hope.
That's a terrible sentence.
Interesting. We both read that slightly different ways. Then that's useful to know.
So that's 3 very different stories.
Yeah.
Did you have a hard time picking the winner?
No, I think we were unanimous. If I remember correctly. No, you were also the same.
Yeah, I think so. It's the heart of the story. Really had a good heart, and I think that's really what made it shine through compared to some of the other stories. I think, yeah.
Well, shall we tell everyone who won? Noel, do you wanna announce the winner?
Only if I get a drum roll. No drum roll? Come on.
I can't do drum rolls.
And the winner is of the Cymera Festival and Shoreline of Infinity Short Story Competition for 2021 is The Microwave Library by David Tam McDonald.
Congratulations!
Well done.
Well done, David. That was brilliant.
Congratulations.
That was a lovely story. Thank you.
Yes, well deserved. Can I just read out at this point? Well, we're going to publish it in Shoreline 23 next week. And I did actually ask David, he does actually know about this already.
No surprises here.
But I did ask him to write me a little bit about why he wrote the story. Can I just read that out to everybody? Is that because I think you'll enjoy this. Let me just get on screen so I can read it carefully. Yeah, David says, I'm originally from Belfast, but I've lived in Glasgow for the last 20 or so years, having come over to go to university in 1997. In real life, I work as a museum educator. I do at my museum or give talks to local historical societies. I've always dabbled in writing, but rarely finished anything to the point I was happy with it. The Cymera competition was a great way to help me focus on my idea and see it to a conclusion. I am delighted and surprised to have won the thing, and it's given me the confidence to get back to many unfinished stories which have been languishing in my laptop.
Well, that's fantastic.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I certainly would love to read some more of David's work. So now, before you all rush out to buy the next Shoreline edition, which I highly recommend you do, we do have a treat for you because we have asked Debbie Cannon to read the story for us. So sit comfortably and enjoy the reading of The Microwave Library by David Tam McDonald, read by Debbie Cannon.
The Microwave Library. The Microwave Library sat, on dry days, under a gazebo at the side of number 5 on our street, which was Roughcastle Court, a suburban cul-de-sac of only 7 houses. From the dormer window of my attic room, I could see the whole court, and down the side of number 5, the Hendersons' house, where the library would sit. The gazebo, legs weighed down by sandbags, covered 3 bookshelves on casters, each piled perilously high with books. The books were laid horizontally along the shelves, one on top of the other, filling every inch of shelf space until it was unclear whether the shelves held the books or the books held up the shelves. An old barbecue with 2 wheels for portability sat at one end of the shelves, and on top of it, a microwave. An extension cord flowed away from it and through an open window. I had watched the Microwave Library from my window many times, though I'd rarely seen anyone use it, certainly not anyone I knew. My parents, predictably, were scathing of it. Books, real books, were unsanitary, they said, especially when passed from person to person. And since all these books were undoubtedly downloadable these days, the library was only a thrawn fetish of the Hendersons, who were probably virus deniers too. My dad said he wasn't sure if it was actually illegal, and all it would take would be for someone to borrow a book and then come down with the virus, and the Hendersons would be in all kinds of trouble. My mother simply tutted at any mention of it, or its wayward owners. The Hendersons were stubborn throwbacks, refusing to believe that the virus had changed everything about the way that we live. They liked holding things, and probably people, in their own ungloved hands. They liked going places, and it was a miracle they hadn't gone somewhere, brought the virus back to Roughcastle Court. When my mother talked about them, she looked ill. That pale and sweaty way you get before you puke. I understood all this. I'd even agreed, but I also wanted to go to the Microwave Library to borrow a book. Perhaps it was the weirdness of the Hendersons and their way of living, and No doubt the idea that I might freak my parents out a bit, but also I wanted to hold a book. I had never held a book before, not an adult book anyway, though I had read and loved and been changed by plenty. I'd probably owned some children's pop-up books before the virus came, but I couldn't remember, and they would have been disposed of long ago. Somehow, I knew that books were supposed to have distinctive smell, and I wanted to try that out. As winter turned to spring, I watched the weather forecast for a dry spell, which would see the microwave library come out of its winter hibernation so I could make my first visit. February that year ended with a glorious sunny dry spell, which led Mother to wonder aloud if the virus wouldn't be so bad this year. An early spring might mean an early and longer summer lull, and this offered all sorts of promise, from the long-awaited defeat of the virus to the slightly more realistic prospect of a summer holiday. I'd only had a summer holiday once before, and it was another pre-virus experience I had no memories of. Mother had a sister, my Auntie Karen, in Anstruther, who I'd only ever seen on screen, and in her rare, hopeful moments, she allowed herself to imagine visiting her. Dad had grander plans. Skye, Loch Ness, perhaps even the English lakes. The only people seemingly not surprised by the early spring were the Hendersons, because the microwave library appeared the next Saturday, as if it had been there all winter. I watched through my attic window as Mr. Henderson dragged the gazebo out onto the driveway. He was in his 60s, rotund, and wearing jeans and a Hawaiian shirt in purple and yellow. What shocked me about him was that he had a long, wild-looking beard. Men these days did not grow beards, as beards were a great place for the virus to hide in. It could crawl out of your mouth or fall out your nose and snuggle deep in amongst the whiskers, waiting for you to pass it on with a big hairy kiss. Ugh. Since the virus, beards were beyond the pale. But there was Mr. Henderson with a big bushy one, huffing and puffing, lifting and tilting and pulling the bookcase over the threshold of his house. Mrs. Henderson appeared to help him. Ages with her husband, less hefty, wearing jeans and black sneakers. A huge, shapeless grey jumper on top, and lots of hair. It was all piled on top of her head with clasps, and undone it would have come down to her waist. They went back inside to get the second bookcase. Then Mr. Henderson manhandled the barbecue and microwave out and organised the electrical cable, while Mrs. Henderson came in and out with armfuls of books, piling them on top of the shelves, squeezing them in wherever. When her hands were empty, she slapped them together up and down, the way folk do when a job is well done. Mr. Henderson took a moment to look at the display of books, kissed his wife on the lips, slipped his arm around her waist, and they both went back inside and shut the door. I had about an hour before my dad would get up to make coffee and shuffle to his desk. My mother's hours were less predictable. She was prone to attacks of anxiety and sleeplessness, which meant she went to bed and got up at different times, depending on how tired and anxious she was. Often, periods of sleeplessness would be followed by enthusiastic use of the treadmill in the living room to tire herself out. There had been at least one period of hardcore lockdown every year since I started school. Lockdowns where people didn't leave the house for months. And when Mum wasn't worrying about the virus, she was worrying that we weren't exercising enough, and she'd make Dad and I do miles on the treadmill. I hadn't heard her on the treadmill last night, so it was hard to know how long I had before she got up. But this was as good an opportunity as I was ever going to get. I slipped out of bed, pulled on tracky bottoms, a hoodie and my sneakers. The stairs up to my attic were spiral and open, and if you leaned on the banister on your belly, you could spin silently to the bottom, which I did. The stairs to the ground floor were trickier. A good few of them creaked and groaned. My dad often complained that I clumped and stomped on them noisily. I crept onto them, pressing my feet to the sides where the wood wasn't so used. The rising sun shone through the glass of the front door, making a rainbow, which I stopped to admire until the sound of my dad sighing as he rolled over in bed brought me back to myself. I turned the snib on the front door dead slow, so only the tiniest click could be heard, and crept out onto a deserted Roughcastle court. The faint buzz of delivery drones could be heard, hovering above the tree line, waiting for 8 o'clock when they could descend to street level and begin their deliveries. Eddie at number 3 had a full cooked breakfast delivered every morning, so one of them would be his, full of hot bacon and beans. A jumbo drone had a sack of cat litter swinging gently beneath it, bound for Mrs. McGarrity at number 6. I crept along the pavement to the bottom of the Henderson's drive and then paused, allowing myself a moment in which I might still change my mind. I was interrupted by a knock on a window, and Mrs. McGarrity was waving at me from her living room. She must sleep by that window. I have never walked past Mrs. McGarrity's and not have her wave cheerily to me. I wave back and smile, as that is what she wants. But now, since I've been seen, I am as well seeing this through, so I plough onwards up the driveway to the shelves of books. I have only read children's books, but these books are different. They are small and thick, and the writing on the spine is tiny. I can't read any of them from where I'm standing, so I have to move closer, finally reaching the top of the driveway where I can hide under the gazebo amongst the shelves and out of sight. I approach a waist-high set of shelves, precariously piled chest-high with paperback books. I want to touch them and read them, but before I can, Mrs. Henderson appears, standing the requisite 2 meters away. Oh, hello there. It's Olivia, isn't it? She is smiling, and she is carrying another handful of books. Have you come to borrow a book? She points to the shelves, then rebalances the pile in her arms. I just smile and nod, aware that I haven't been this close to anyone other than my mum and dad for months. Not since the last failed attempt to restart schooling. Mrs. Henderson lollops over and starts arranging the books on the shelves. I pick up A Clockwork Orange, even though I've already read it. Oh, that's a classic, Mrs. H soothes. Fire it in the microwave if you're worried about the germs. Will that kill the virus? I ask, amazed. Oh, who knows, she muses. Can't hurt though. She slips back inside and the door is shut, though not fully. I lift my book to my nose to sample the famous smell, but catch myself before inhaling. I take my book over to the microwave. A sign stuck to the top advises just 15 seconds on max power and to do 1 book at a time. I pop A Clockwork Orange in, turn the dial up to 15 and press the chunky start button. A spring tings, there is a hum, and A Clockwork Orange turns slowly under a yellow light. The ding when the timer finishes is both comical and shocking in the quiet street. I am sure someone will have heard, and they will know I've been hanging out with the weird, dangerous Hendersons, getting myself all journey on books already handled by hordes of people. I retrieve the book, and it feels the same as it did when I put it in. I think I was expecting it to be hot or vibrating or something. The cover is glossy, but it feels furry at the edges where it is worn. There are ridges down the spine, and I open it along these and lift it to my face and take a deep breath. There is definitely a smell. I don't know immediately if it is a good one because it is so strange to me. I guess it is the smell of paper, wood even. This book has never been sanitised, so the smell must be old. I wonder how many hands have turned these pages, and if the smell has a little of every person who has read this book, every home it has been in. Nothing in my house smells at all. Everything is so frequently sanitised. I am glad now to have the book, just for its smell. I close it and put it in the huge pocket of my hoodie. Mrs. Henderson is looking through a window at me and just smiling. I think she knows about the smell. I wave and take my book home to smell later.
Thank you very much, Debbie. That was fantastic. I hope you enjoyed that. You can now also read the 2 other shortlisted stories on the Cymera website. Just head over to chimerafestival.co.uk and you will find them under the competition banner to read. Well, that brings us to the end of our panel. All that's left to do is say a big, big thank you to our fantastic judges for sharing their expertise, their insights, and for giving us the time as well to read so many short stories. Well, I mean, it was lockdown. What else were you going to do? But that is not true. That is not true. You were busy writing your own work, and I loathe to keep you from it because I love both your writing. So I can't wait to read more of your work as well. And Noel's been very busy putting together Shorelines. Do you want to do a little plug for your new Shoreline format?
All right, yes. Shoreline of Infinity has been going for over 5 years now, and we thought we'd do a little refresh this year, just for fun, just to experiment, play around. So we've gone digital every month. There's a digital edition of Shoreline of Infinity, but every 6 months we are producing a printed edition, which is a mix of new stories and some stories from the digital editions. And this one coming up, Shoreline of Infinity number 23, which is being published on Monday, is exactly that. It's a print edition. So if you still like the smell of a book, then we still do those. So try to get the best of both worlds. People have said how much they like reading the stories on a Kindle. Some still prefer in print format. So we're still catering for that. But this way, you get your fix of short story regularly every month, and that's something I've always wanted to do. With potential of actually creating series. We're looking for a serial, so we're looking to do that in the next few months. We've got an idea bubbling away in the background.
That's very exciting. And there's probably some short fiction writers listening to this panel right now. How do they get their story into a Shoreline?
Right, well, that's the benefit of this model is that we've managed to increase the number of stories we can publish each year overall. And so we've opened up the submission windows. So pretty well every month there's a submission window you can submit your story to. So go on the website, shorelineofinfinity.com, and you can then see where the information is about how to submit your story. So, and also in issue 23, we've got our annual flash fiction competition as well. So look out for that in issue 23.
So there you go. You're armed with lots of really good advice. You're armed with places to go to. And the Cymera Prize for Speculative Short Fiction will be back in 2022. It will once again. What year is this? It might still be called After the Plague. No, there will be
the plague after the plague.
After the plague. Yes, after the plague. No, we will announce the new theme in December. Best place to find out about this by subscribing to our newsletter. I'll just hang out on our social media, so we'll let you know there, and then you can get submitting. So thank you again. Thanks again to Oliver Langmead, Cat Hellisen, and Noel Chidwick, and thank you all for watching.